Now that we have seen how arrays are declared and how they utilize memory and how to have a basic access to it directly using either an index or a pointer, now we're going to look at a more automated way of either entering data or retrieving data from an array if we're doing so in an orderly manner, which means we start with the first element to the last element or backwards, as long as we know the size of the array. Remember that arrays are fixed size data structures, which means once you declare them at compile time, they will remain that size throughout the running of the program. Knowing that, that means we already know the size of the array. So it is probably always a good idea to have an integer size value that you would use at the moment of declaration for an array. So to be specific, let's do an example. It probably is a good idea to do something like this, int size, and then you will do something like this, 5. And then declare your array. Let's say your array now holds float type of numbers, and specifically in C++, we will use double, okay? And let's say my array has size in it in terms of delineating where does it start and where does it end. So it will start with 0 and end with 4. It always starts at 0. Once we start accessing the array. So having a size of 5 means you start at 0 and you end at 4. Okay? Keep that in mind. Always starting at 0, which will help us now defining how we're going to do the data input in the array. So we're going to input data into the array. And then we're going to retrieve data and print data. Print to the screen. Okay, so this is a really simple exercise here. So the first thing is you have choices on how to do this. You can input one at a time, randomly, or orderly. If you're going to do orderly, then you have choices of loops that you could use. Do while loop, for loop. They're all legitimate tools to do so. A lot of people prefer for loops for this. Okay, since you can set with the beginning, how far, and the incrementation. So if I were to do a for loop, I would need to control the index that decides where in the array I am. So you're going to use I as an index, I as a variable. You could declare I separately, or you could do something like this. For int I equals 0, so you set it to 0, okay? And then I less than size. And notice how size comes in handy. So you don't have to remember that the size was 5. So no matter what, so you could readjust your program, put a 20 here. You will always use the keyword size, so you don't have to readjust code here or rewrite code. So that's one advantage of doing so. And then semicolon I++. So this allows us to increment the counter one at a time for every iteration. So I is basically a counter in one way or the other. And we're going to put a curly brace here and a curly brace, and we're going to use it as the index for the array. So, for example, I could have something like this. Cout, enter, enter a number. Okay, so we're going to enter a number, and this is a real number since it's a float type double, right? That's what you're going to enter. And you're going to do this, cin. And then notice your array. You're going to store this in the array, but where? With the index I. So think about this loop here. It's going from 0 to 4. So the first time around, I is 0. So you're going to go to the first element. The second time around, I is 1. So you're going to the second element, etc., until you reach I is 4, which is the fifth element. So this basic loop here allows you to populate the array. Can we use a for loop to retrieve the data and print it to a screen? Absolutely. Can we use a while loop, a do while loop? Yes. Whatever you want to do. So let's do a while loop. So if you want to do a while loop, remember from a previous lesson, you need to prime, okay, the variable that you use for the while loop. So for example, let's say this time we're going to declare something counter, okay, and set it to 0, okay, and then what you can do, that's called priming. While counter, so that's your condition, counter is less than size, open curly brace, close curly brace, okay. So we're going to do everything the for loop would have done, but I'm just doing an exercise here so you can see that you can do this with a while loop. Now remember, somehow inside the loop you need to increment counter. Otherwise you will remain at counter 0, which means the first element. So make sure that you have this here, in here, so you can exit the counter, the loop counter eventually. So let's do this. You want to print, so cout. Okay? And you could do something like this. Element. And then you could do something like this. If you want to be fancy, you could put the counter here. And then you could do something like this. Equals. And that would be my array. Counter now. Notice here I'm using the counter as my index. Okay? And then end out. Okay? So this should give you a chance to access the array using the counter as your index. So let's see. So we've seen here two ways of accessing an array. Okay, let's compile and run. And notice here it's going to ask me for a number. So 12.3 minus 9.2, 100. And I'm going to enter 0 for this one. And this one I'm going to enter a 22. Let's see how it works. And there you have it. So you get the same. Element 0 is 12.3. Element 1 is minus 9.2, etc. Okay? So from 0 to 4, you have 5 elements. Okay, so for the next lesson, we're going to use pointers to access an array, either to write or read as an exercise.